All right, welcome into a Locked On NBA Roundtable. It is the play-in range. We got to throw the range in because there's two teams not in the play-in in this group here. But the play-in range of the Western Conference. Nick Angstead from the Locked On Mavericks podcast representing here, and from Locked On Clippers.
Hey, it's Chuck Mockler of Locked On Clippers, and I'm tossing it over to...
I'm Matt Moore. I'm from Locked On Nuggets. And
Andy
here
Kamenetsky.
is...
Sorry. Andy Kamenetsky, Locked On Lakers.
And Ben Beecken, Locked On Wolves.
There you go. Those are the voices. Everybody covers their team daily on their own Locked On podcast for Locked On Mavs, Locked On Clippers, Locked On Nuggets, Locked On Lakers, Locked On Wolves. Locked On Wolves, welcome. Welcome to the playoffs.
I appreciate. Hey, not yet. Let's not put that out there yet. No. Yeah, it's an unusual feeling, to be sure.
Welcome in. All right, let's start right away. Do any of the changes in the trade deadline, this is for anybody, do any of the changes at the trade deadline really affect the landscape of what your team was expecting to end the season or going into the postseason? Because there wasn't a ton of changes in the West. Did anything stick out to you guys?
Well, until Norm Powell got hurt, I was very excited about the trade deadline. I think the Clippers made a bunch of moves for next season and the seasons after that. If you look at Norm Powell's contract, it lines up with kind of what Kawhi and PG are going to do timeline-wise. When he was playing for us this season, he showed that he can score. He can do all of the things basically that offensively the Clippers needed when Kawhi and PG do take time off, which is going to continue to happen for their tenure with the Clippers. But now that he has a foot issue, I don't think the moves change a whole lot. Robert Covington's been fantastic. He's a great piece to kind of add to our wing stop strategy that we have going on. But, other than that, I think it's just moves for the next year.
Speaking of moves for the next year, the Mavericks traded Kristaps Porzingis over to the Washington Wizards and got Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. This was a move for flexibility, right? If you've listened to us at all on Locked On Mavs, this is a move about taking one contract and turning it into two contracts, and none of them are good. The contracts, at least, for any of those guys involved. But at least they split it into two. They also get the secondary ball handler, or at least another ball handler that they've wanted. They get to move forward. Kristaps Porzingis had become a process-stopping player for the Mavericks. They were all these different players. I mean, how many times over the course of Locked On Mavs history with Porzingis have we said, well, you can't go after that free agent, or you can't go after this guy in a trade because they can't play with Porzingis. They can't make it work with Porzingis. It just wouldn't fit with Porzingis. It just wouldn't fit, what if he needs to get his touches. There's all these different things. And so now the Mavs are moving past that. They maybe take a little step backwards this year and take another step forward. My co-host Isaac disagrees about the step backwards this year, but we'll see what Spencer Dinwiddie and Bertans can actually bring. And the Mavs are looking towards next season. Does anybody else feel like any moves made any changes in the West for us?
I mean, I think for the Nuggets in particular. By the way, funny story on the Porzingis trade. Dallas spent most of the early part of the week offering THJ to all the teams that they were involved in for Porzingis, and then came back on Thursday morning and were like, "Hey, so we said THJ? Like theoretically, if it wasn't THJ, if it was, I don't know, Kristaps Porzingis, what would you say?"
Similar players.
That was the impression from multiple sources. For the Nuggets, honestly, it was a matter of watching what everyone else did in this group, I think in particular, because, they're chasing the Mavericks, and theoretically, like you said, the Mavericks take a step back, but they just keep winning because Luke is on one of those tears that he goes on. The Clippers obviously get a lot better with their trade deadline move, but there's still kind of the question of, are they going to be able to have Kawhi and PG back this season or not, with the implication that Ty Lue's made kind of suggested that they're not. And then you got the Lakers. That's a thing. And then with the Wolves, them not trading D'Angelo Russell or making any sort of like big addition, I think that's also, a win for the Nuggets. The Nuggets are just hoping basically to get through the deadline and not get lapped because they had nothing they were able to trade for.
No, the trade deadline basically just pissed off the Lakers or LeBron specifically. It created tension that is currently being dealt with right now, but fundamentally, no, it did not change the team at all. Not due to the trade deadline, but just an unfortunate coincidence. Anthony Davis is out 4 weeks, which had been decided after the deadline because of that foot sprain. So just, things keep moving along nicely over in LA.
Yeah, and for the Timberwolves, I mean, this is the best place the team has been from a chemistry standpoint, a roster standpoint, in a decade and a half at least. And so it was, why rock the boat? They got the nice Patrick Beverley extension added a year on, which was the move when they knew they weren't. The only way he was going to get traded is if he was part of a much larger deal for a bigger name guy. The the guys that didn't get traded or like were injured, like a Miles Turner, or the guys that did, like a Ben Simmons, if those things weren't going to happen, Beverly wasn't going anywhere. And now they know he's around for another year. And I think most Wolves fans are pretty happy with that outcome.
Let's go back to that Porzingis trade because it was probably the biggest move. Sorry, Chuck, for all your Norm Powell love over there, but it was the biggest move that was made in this group, at least. Matt, do we think that it changed the Mavericks, what they can do this season? As looking at it from the Nuggets perspective, were you more excited about the Nuggets' chances to catch the Mavs or to move past them in the standings when you saw that they actually made that trade?
I mean, I think I'm still kind of expecting a little bit of a tail off. I mean, the Mavericks all season long have been kind of perplexing. This is a team that's been garbage defensively for 3 years, and all of a sudden this turned into a top 10 defense. Props to Jason Kidd, I guess.
5.
And then excuse me. And then, Porzingis, I think, wasn't necessarily the scariest player. I think the long-term future for the Nuggets, they have to be worried about it. Like that, I think, is the key. Is if the Mavericks are able to then reposition and get somebody better to play next to Luka, I think that actually makes them scarier long-term. I think in the short term, it probably helps, but the Nuggets are going to have to start fixing their own problems internally in terms of the bench and getting Jamal Murray back and maybe MPJ. Like they have all these things I think that they're looking at. I think with the Mavericks, it should make them worse. It's just going to be interesting to see whether or not it does, because the early returns have not indicated such.
Chuck, you saw both versions of Porzingis in the last two playoff series that the Mavs and Clippers faced off. The first year, he was looking pretty scary, right? He had a 30-point game, he had a 20-point game. Mm-hmm. And then the second year, he was stuck in the corner for different reasons. What do you think about the Mavs' chances this year?
I mean, the Mavs and Clippers are kind of destined to just meet and have brutal playoff matchups, it feels like, for the next couple of years. Thankfully, the Clippers have come out on top recently, but I think it moves. I think Bertans is going to remember how to shoot a basketball. I think his drop-off is one that was so steep that it almost feels like it's anomaly status. And I think Dinwiddie, he's got something to talk crypto with Mark Cuban, so that'll be a good time. He'll be in a good headspace there for that. But I think a lot of it just hinges on Kidd. I didn't think Jason Kidd would be coaching this well for you guys. I think a lot of Mavs fans probably shared that sentiment. So it's really just what he can get out of it, and if he can deal with this change and things like that.
Andy, you've mentioned a couple times in your show that the Lakers wanted Jason Kidd as the head coach. Are you surprised about how well Jason Kidd has coached in Dallas?
Yeah, actually I am, because I hadn't been necessarily that impressed with him in Milwaukee beyond developing Giannis. I think he deserves some credit for like sort of the early foundation with Giannis, but I think it's also been pretty obvious that the guy was talented enough that he was going to flourish. I think really no matter who coached him, which again isn't to take away from Kidd. It just means that it doesn't necessarily speak to his strengths as a coach. And then he was more remembered for his antics in Brooklyn than anything he actually did with a whiteboard. And the Lakers very clearly wanted him as their head coach, but they didn't like the optics of it with kids, stuff off the court, personal issues and stuff like that. And they basically tried to sneak him through the back door by requiring him to be on the staff of whoever they hired. And then in the case of Frank Vogel, I think the expectation was, if Vogel struggled or Kidd just manipulated his way to the front of the line, he'd eventually be the coach. But credit where credit's due. It didn't look like it was going to be that good of a match in the beginning, but clearly something is working. So good for him.
And we've heard none of that manipulation type stuff with the Mavericks either, right? It's been this is one of our favorite drops.
This is a positive world.
Jason Kidd, it's positive. Everything's
that is so creepy.
Everything's chilling.
Really
everything's chilling. Positive.
Sounds like a serial killer reassuring
or like a
his
cult
victim.
leader. Yeah, like
this is a positive world.
Oh man, he's rubbing someone's shoulders as he's saying that.
He's doing the Biden like lean in and sniff.
With the lotion back in the basket.
Coming up, I want to talk about the actual most deadly, dangerous accusation that could happen. Accusation? What was I saying?
Oh, there's a lot of those we could throw around.
I realized this was an NFL podcast.
Is Jamal Murray coming back to the Denver Nuggets? We'll talk about that and the Nuggets, how dangerous they could be coming up. But before we do, let me tell you about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It's super easy. You pick 2 to 5 players and pick their over-under and on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. You can go and use this on the NBA. When the NFL was playing, you could use it on that. You could use it on college. There's all kinds of different things that you can do with PrizePicks. They offer you any prop you can think of, from points scored, rebounds, steals, all kinds of things. And you can do mix and match all kinds of different players, not just the starters, but the bench players as well. PrizePicks doesn't just offer NBA. They have college football, NFL, MLB, soccer. MLB, do they even play games anymore? I mean, maybe when they do, you can get it on PrizePicks. For a limited time, PrizePicks is an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you must use the code NBA. This is an exclusive offer available to us and you guys, the Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the code NBA to get $50 free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. Go check it out, prizepicks.com. Download the app, promo code NBA. All right, guys, let's get into the Denver Nuggets. Matt Moore, Jamal Murray is going to make his return at some point, and I think that makes the Nuggets one of probably the scariest team in this group if Jamal Murray can return to at least some of the form that he has been in the playoffs in the past. What's the status on him, and what should we be expecting from him when he comes back?
So I had been given a timeline of basically after All-Star, between All-Star and the end of the month. That was before Murray had a bout with health and safety protocols. I took him out for about 10 days and set his return back. Now I'm looking probably first, second, maybe third week of March, but I wouldn't expect it past then. He has not been cleared for contact, so there's always a chance that he just doesn't get there. Like, there's a possibility that Murray doesn't return this season. Michael Malone has pushed that pretty hard. I will tell you that from the people I've talked to, I'm still expecting him to return to play sometime in the month of March. That's what I'm anticipating. So I think they get Murray back with about a month left to play. There's going to be probably some growing pains in that time period. It's going to be a struggle to get him. It's not just getting him reacclimated, which is going to be a struggle. It's also figuring out the minutes rotation, and then all of the changes to the rotation are going to be significant. Now, the good news for the Nuggets is it literally can't be worse because they have the worst bench in the NBA. But there is still going to have to they're going to have to figure stuff out about how to balance things, who to stagger, how to stagger, reestablishing that chemistry, as well as getting Murray back up to speed. So he should be back, I think, by the middle of March. If he doesn't, there's a chance I think he misses the whole season. And then there's also Michael Porter Jr., who, as I understand it, it is not out of question for him to return. It's a battle of the risk management of him coming off of another back surgery versus how much better he feels since the surgery. He has looked awesome. He has looked great. There's been growing optimism about him. It started at a non-zero chance he comes back this season, and then it was like a non-10% chance he comes back this season. And I don't know exactly where it is now, but there is a small possibility that the Nuggets, at least on paper, are back to full strength by the time the playoffs begin. And from there, I think it's going to be all about matchups.
Ben Beecken, from the outside looking in, does the Nuggets team with Jamal Murray, possibly back at full strength, maybe with Michael Porter Jr., is that a team that can win the title? Is that how scary that team can be, or where would you place that team in the hierarchy here?
I think so. I mean, I think coming into this year, most of us would have had them in the top 3 in the West, certainly top 4. I mean, obviously, for all the reasons Matt just said, there's a lot to him personally getting up to speed individually, as well as gelling with the team, figuring out the bench rotation. But I mean, this was a team that was the number 1 seed not too long ago. So I think absolutely. And especially with the way that the West is shaken out, obviously the teams at the top are formidable, but clearly the Nuggets would be the class of this group of teams. And from a Timberwolves perspective, the Timberwolves have struggled with the Nuggets quite a bit over the past few years. I think they lost, I forget how many in a row exactly, but it was double digits games in a row, basically since game 82. Back in the Jimmy Butler season, 2018, they lost consecutively a bunch of games. So the Wolves will struggle with the Nuggets as a matchup. And that's, of course, who the Timberwolves are chasing for the number 6 seed to get out of the play-in.
The Denver Nuggets, what's the biggest weakness for the Nuggets going throughout the rest of this season? What do you think is something that they absolutely have to address for them to stay out of the play-in and not get caught by the Wolves?
That's a great question.
Thanks.
Their balance of schedule is interesting. They have the 23rd toughest remaining strength of schedule by opponent record. They are one of the easiest schedules in the league based off of rest as well, over a positive residual. So the schedule is manageable. I think probably the key for them is their defense has looked absolutely atrocious at times. Their starters are really burned out. Jokic is burned out. Will Barton's burned out. Aaron Gordon's burned out. Those guys have had to play heavy minutes because of how short the rotation has been without those guys. I think there's a real fatigue factor that can kick in here, especially with them knowing the playoffs are a month away and being like, we made it. Well, not really. You still have to be able to close this out and be able to gain some ground. So I think that's honestly the biggest battle that they're going to have. They haven't had a good record versus any of the their record versus teams over 500 is poor. So they're going to need to get more of those wins. The win versus the Warriors was obviously, I think, a step in the right direction. But I think ultimately it's going to be, can they reintegrate these guys and still be able to keep rhythm? Can you do all this within a month? That's a lot to ask of a team, especially given the length of absences of the guys that they're getting back, as well as all the fatigue factored in. This is going to be a bit of a juggling act, I think, for the Nuggets the rest of the way.
Don't all of our teams have a win against the Warriors? It just felt really, really good. I think all of our teams have had, maybe not the Clippers. No, for the
no Steph Curry, but we'll take it.
Lakers haven't had one either. Okay, Warriors, Avs, and Nuggets. Then I
don't remember off the top of my head, but I know about a week or so ago we did play the Warriors very well.
We actually got a dub.
The mighty have fallen.
I just don't remember the schedule off the top of my head, to be fair. Like, they may actually have this win, and I'm going to look it up.
Just
we got one over the Warriors
during
a hellish back-to-back that was Warriors-Suns, and we got the first one against the Warriors, and then promptly lost to the Suns the next day, so we'll take it.
They're that team that is now like, if you beat them, you feel really good about yourselves, and they're pretty beatable some nights. Moving on to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Wow. Welcome to this group. Welcome to the postseason. What's the biggest reason why the Wolves are over 500 for the second time since 2005?
Well, the crazy thing is that the roster is basically the same. 10 of the top 12 guys are the same players. The biggest thing is the personnel that they have currently has just played better. And I know that seems crazy, but Karl-Anthony Towns has been mostly himself on offense, but he's been useful defensively. He's been much better defensively. And I think the coaching is certainly better. Chris Finch is an obvious upgrade in the coaching department, and that's huge. And then the leadership, which is Chris Finch, but also adding Patrick Beverley. Even though 10 of the 12 guys are the same, we're talking about Patrick Beverley and Taurean Prince, who are two well-respected veterans that I think have really helped kind of stabilize the locker room. So really individual growth. And I know it feels like a cop-out, but health really matters. And this team, last year, D'Angelo Russell and Karl-Anthony Towns played less than 20 games together, both healthy. They were over 500 in those games. And so there was certainly some signs, especially late in the year after Chris Finch took over, that the Timberwolves were improving as a whole, and that Finch knew what he was doing, and that Towns was growing, and D'Angelo Russell actually meshed well with him. And if they could play better defensively, then they could be, they could be a playoff team. And the weird thing is that it started this year with the defense being really good. It was a top 10 defense until really a couple weeks ago. And the concern is the bottom has started to fall out a little bit defensively. The Timberwolves play a weird brand of defense where they're completely reliant on generating turnovers, which in turn helps their offense in the secondary break, and they get a lot of easy baskets that way. So against teams that are really under control and kind of play their own game and are well coached and control the ball well and don't make big mistakes or a lot of mistakes, I should say. The Wolves can struggle with those teams, but they can beat up on bad teams. They can beat good teams that are just a little bit off because of the way they play defensively. And the offense was awful early in the season. And that's coming around now too, because they're figuring out different ways to use Towns. Teams were doubling him in the low post, so they moved him to the mid post. They started playing him on the perimeter a lot more and allowing him to have more face-up situations where teams just couldn't double team him because he can take basically any big off the dribble. So I guess to boil it down, I would say individual growth. I would say leadership and coaching, and just being able to play your best players more minutes together. And the fact that they're all young enough that there's still like a lot of improvement to still be had. I think all those things together have really kind of, that's why they're 3 games above 500 at the All-Star break.
Chuck, your Clippers are looking at playing the Timberwolves in that first play-in game. What scares you the most about the Timberwolves?
I mean, well, first of all, it's a rematch of Karl-Anthony Towns versus Luke Kennard for the 3-point crown. No, I think it's the paint defense, right? Like the Clippers somehow, I still don't think it's talked about enough, have the 7th best defensive rating in the league, which if you look at our personnel is pretty incredible considering the losses we've had. But it's the paint defense. Karl-Anthony Towns can absolutely feast on, Zubats is great. He does a lot of good things well, but there are times when talent wins out, and Karl-Anthony Towns can do that. Patrick Beverley, I also think, is motivated to play any team he used to play on, even if it ended amicably. I think he's going to be going for blood.
Well, luckily, that's all of them.
Yeah, very true. He's going
to be going for blood in a different way than he has been before.
Yeah, but that's the biggest issue. I have no coaching wise. I think Ty Lue has the upper hand for sure, and we're already dealing with a bunch of injuries. We don't know what's going to happen with that. we have heard kind of some little scuttlebutt here and there that there might be some good news upcoming this Thursday in regards to some pretty big Clippers players and potentially returning, which would be a very big get for the Clips. But continuity, you have to deal with the ramp up periods and things like that. So, I mean, this core has shown that it's perfect kind of for, having 2 stars and then Norm Powell also on the team too. So it's going to go as far as they can take us. They played a lot of minutes. It's fatigue and paint defense, basically.
Ben, last one quickly. Is this Towns team or Anthony Edwards team?
Man, I hate that question. I think it's still Towns team. I think that Towns and Edwards have such a good relationship and they understand kind of each other's roles. And early in the season, it was kind of a weird my turn, your turn offense where it was, Edwards just plays isolation ball and then shoots a step back 3. And then it turned into just a lot of just running plays for Towns. And I think they've kind of got this understanding now that some nights one of them is going to get the ball more and get more shots up and the other one won't. And they're both okay with deferring. We've seen recently Edwards dropped 40 points. I think it was against Portland. And then he was single digits the next couple of nights. And it wasn't a huge thing. He was still himself. He was still this happy-go-lucky 20-year-old that was, whatever, I'll get 40 again sometime soon. And that was just kind of the vibe. And maybe that changes in a couple of years and who knows, maybe success will kind of throw that off. But I think right now I would still say it's Towns' team. Edwards knows that. He's a 3-time All-Star. Edwards isn't. LaMelo Ball was an All-Star this year. Anthony Edwards wasn't. I think that there's still something out there. There's still a carrot for Anthony Edwards. He knows it's not quite his team. But at this moment in time, I think he's okay with that.
It's not his team, but it is his world, right? Every time I see a quote coming out from him, I'm like, man, that guy,
That's right.
If he was playing for the Lakers, I think he may be the most famous person in like the NBA at this point, right? Just
absolutely.
The way he talks. All right, coming up, we're going to get into the LA teams that somehow are on the backside of this play-in tournament. We'll talk about those teams. But before we do, let me tell you about betonline.net. Football is over, but basketball is in full steam for pro and college hoops. Go check out everything that BetOnline has to offer right now. They have championship odds for the NBA. The team with the best championship odds right now in this group are the Denver Nuggets, plus 2,800. The Mavericks, plus 4,000. Actually, the Lakers, plus 3,300. The Lakers have better odds than the Mavericks to win the title right now, which is interesting. Clippers, plus 100,000. So, okay, Matt, 10,000. Matt, you're the betting expert here. So if I put down $100 and the Clippers win, I can win $10,000.
Yes.
You won't, but you could.
Yeah. If I put $10 down, I could win $1,000, right? And just start putting $10. Just might as well just throw it out there. So go check it out on BetOnline. They have you can use the website, use the mobile device, learn about all the trends in action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, guys, moving on to the next team in the standings here, the Los Angeles Clippers. Moving on to their own arena. Moving on to bigger and better things with the Clippers.
Theoretically, yes.
What should we expect out of this Clippers team with all the injuries? Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. It feels like every other week there's this rumor. Chris Haynes will be like, Kawhi Leonard is like ramping up, and you're like, I don't know.
Explosive box jumps have been the hot term used for Kawhi lately, which has been infuriating. No, what I mean, so PG gets an MRI on the 24th, and if everything's clear there's going to be a ramp up period. And he might play in early March, which would be great. Kawhi, absolutely nobody knows. There has been some stuff we've heard where maybe there's some good news coming. But, other than, I think the overall goal basically is to just keep the intensity up. They had the comeback against the Wizards. They've had multiple comebacks this year. Keep the intensity up and just try and ruin someone's day in the playoffs. Like we know what this core is. We know that they're a very good team of supporting cast. That's great. Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris are not supposed to be your first and second or even third or fourth options. And they've had to have higher usage this year. And we kind of had a weird divorce with Serge. We saw the rise of Isaiah Hartenstein as the second center. So it's really just getting these reps in for these guys and figuring out how much money you want to finally pay Amir Coffey to be an actual member of the Clippers instead of a two-way guy, which is weird because he's been on this team as longer than anyone else other than like Zoo, and he's been a two-way guy the whole time. So it's about making noise and just, not losing the intensity.
Andy, the Lakers may face the Clippers in the play-in. What are your thoughts on that potential matchup of just a weird, like, no-star team versus an all-star, like, former star team?
I mean, first of all, just We have been promised since I first began covering the Lakers, which was the
Streetlights over
2005.
spotlights.
Well,
Oh, God.
way longer than that. I'm talking about during Lakers versus Lob City. I'm talking before the Kobe Smush Kwame team was supposed to be facing like Elton Brand and Sam
Corey
Cassell.
Maggette.
Yep.
This was the 2006 playoffs. The Lakers had a 3-1 lead over the Suns, which was in and of itself inexplicable because that Suns team was way better than those Lakers teams. Basically, just Kobe was doing everything. And the Clippers had beaten the Nuggets in the first round. So, like, everything seemed set up for finally we're getting this hallway series. Didn't happen. And ever since then,
Ooh.
it's just been this massive tease. So it really would feel like the basketball gods were just giving double middle fingers if this finally happened, but it's in the play-in. Like,
Yeah.
just so anticlimactic. I mean, as far as who'd win right now, I mean, the Lakers theoretically, as is with both of these teams, they have the best player with LeBron. There's no question. But the team that is operating and functioning the best is the Clippers. And that's not even close.
Turns out it's a team game.
I mean, look, you're asking me these questions about the play-in, Nick. I don't even know if we're going to get to April without LeBron murdering Rob Pelinka. So, I don't want to look too far ahead.
Is there any idea that LeBron shuts it down for the season? Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't think we're there yet, but I think, like all things with this season right now and everything having been so chaotic and going so against the plans, depending on what happens with Anthony Davis, who is, he was given a 4-week timeline for reevaluation. That was on the 17th of February. His track record is not that of quick recoveries, but let's just be ambitious and say he's back on the court in 5 weeks. That would be, I believe, the 24th of March. What does the team look like by then? How far have they advanced? How far have they fallen behind? Have they managed to maintain status quo? Because I think all of that could affect, what they decide to do with LeBron or what LeBron decides to do with himself. So, I mean, it is very, very difficult to predict where any of this is going to go. I don't think there are immediate plans to shut LeBron down or anything like that, but I don't think it is impossible that we could end up there depending on how these next few weeks shake out.
What's crazy with these two teams is that I know where the Lakers are. Like, I know how bad they've been. I know how bad the situation is. Like, I watch all the All-Star stuff too, as like LeBron just followed the script. The fact that like every national reporter is like, "Oh, we're doing this again, huh?" Okay. Like, that's concerning. But at the same time, if the Clippers get back Kawhi and PG, I do not think it's insane that they can win the title. That's how good this team has been. Like, they have the infrastructure there, and those guys fit pretty seamlessly into it. PG was amazing before he went out. And with the Lakers, I know this seems like even more of a stretch, which is crazy because on and Anthony Davis. But I also look at it and go, like, look, if they get the 7th seed and the Warriors hold on to the 2, and the Lakers get out of the play-in and they get the 7th spot, that's that Warriors team that they're better this year, no question. They're much better than last year. But they're better because of guys like Otto Porter and Bielitsa and those type of dudes, where this is still Anthony Davis and LeBron James versus a pretty small Warriors team that has had trouble with them. Like those have been competitive games. Like there was like that Saturday night game a couple weeks ago. And then in the second round, it would be a Grizzlies team who is basically just like, wow, this is so cool. We're like a real team now. Who also are really terrible in the half court. Like, I don't think either of the LA teams are dead in the water for the title.
Wow.
Yeah, you mentioned, kind of the Warriors. I would love a Warriors matchup for the Clippers if they made it out. I would even, now that Chris Paul, we don't know what's going on with that, I wouldn't mind a Suns matchup with them, either.
Really well
I do not want to play the Grizzlies in the first round of these playoffs because I think the first round Memphis Grizzlies are going to really wow people. And then I think when it gets to the second round, it gets a little different looking for that team. But yeah, thank you for the kind words. We need those right now, Matt.
we've done sort of the Lakers, why are they here sort of thing. And we've talked about what hope. But Andy, do you want to
How
give?
much time do you have, Nick?
I was gonna say, Andy, do you want to try
We got a half hour left on the.
You want to try to just like bullet point list the reasons why the Lakers are here?
I mean, look, everybody knows the issues with roster construction and stuff like that, and just sort of the different steps along the way that have not worked out that have led to this point. If I had to narrow it down, though, to one thing in terms of what I assume is the tension that you're referencing, that's growing very public, passive aggressive stuff with LeBron, basically praising every GM in all of sports that isn't his own. I think it was when Rob Pelinka, after the deadline, said that LeBron and Anthony Davis were in alignment with not making moves at the deadline. I think that's something that really pissed off LeBron, because at that point, Pelinka, and this was not necessary for him to say at all, came across like he was using LeBron as a meat shield. It was a very unforced error from an exec, a GM who has a habit that, to his credit, he hasn't fallen into too much lately, but of saying more than he should and talking more than he should. And had he just said, look, we were disappointed that we couldn't find a deal that worked at the deadline because we are always looking to make our team better. And I know that LeBron and Anthony were disappointed by that as well. However, I feel very good about this team's mentality heading into the All-Star break and, where just the group mindset is at. And I feel confident that we are going to have a strong finish to the season, and I'm going to be working like a madman with the buyout market. Maybe that doesn't make them any happier, or in particular LeBron, but it doesn't give him a specific reason, I think, to lash out or, to do this very passive aggressive signaling, trying to create the looming threat of an early exit. I think that is, if more than any one single thing, what set this off.
All right, let's move on to some rapid fire questions for everyone. Does anyone think a team other than the Mavericks or Nuggets will finish 5-6 in the Western Conference standings?
Yes.
Who?
I don't think so.
I think the Wolves get the 6.
Ooh.
I feel. I think.
Good.
I was gonna say, in my opinion, it hinges on Jamal Murray really, and how that all shakes out. I think the Wolves are going to play well enough, but can they catch the Nuggets? I think they have the 2-1 series lead on the Nuggets this year, I believe. I think they won the last two. And so there is still a tiebreaker to be had there too. So I think it's gonna be close, but I think there's a shot the Wolves get the 6.
Oh, let's be clear. I think the Nuggets get the 5.
Oh,
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
Look, and this is what I got back to, right? Is like logically, if you look at this, the Mavericks just traded one really questionable player who constantly fought with the star for 2 different contracts for a guy who the entire locker room hated, and Davis Bertans, a pure shooter who right now cannot shoot. Like, on paper, the Mavericks fall down. Now, again, as I said earlier, it may not happen. So this is the weird where I'm forced to be like, what's more likely to happen? Like, what all of the factors in team basketball says, or just like Luka's like, nope. And that's like really the battle here is like, it's chemistry and tactics and scheme and personnel versus Luka Doncic is amazing. And that's like really the battle. But if you look at the Wolves, I'll say this about the Wolves. You look at that Wolves record when Cat, Towns, and Russell play together, like not Cat Towns, Cat, Edwards, and Russell play together, like they're phenomenal. Like they are phenomenal when those three, the record for those 3 guys is terrific. I think their defense probably picks back up. I think the Wolves have a genuine shot at getting out of the play-in.
Yeah, and to that point, the Wolves do have I think the starting unit, preferred starting 5 when Beverly's healthy, which we know he misses, as you know, Chuck, he misses like a game every 2 weeks, and that's at this point partly by design. When they play together, they're like the second rated starting unit that's played at least 200 minutes together league wide, and so it is a really deep team as well. They've kind of weathered some kind of nagging injuries to Russell and to Beverly as well. So I think they're kind of built for to be able to extend to the stretch run.
to maybe just defend the Mavericks here a little bit. In sending out Kristaps Porzingis, now what they are, they've become that Rockets team that that traded Capella, right? Like they've become that team. They're a smaller team now. Their two centers now are essentially Dwight Powell and Maxi Kleber, who are smaller centers. They're 6'9", 6'10", but they can switch out. They can go out and guard some guards. They are, they become more flexible on defense a little bit in a way. When they had Porzingis, Jamal Murray would just like carve up Porzingis in a pick and roll, and it was just like done. You couldn't play him anymore at that point. So that's what they've become. And I think, to Matt's point, it is now more about scheme. It's about, okay, this team has a set identity. It's going to pride itself on defense, and it's just going to be Luka and Brunson playing offense and then kicking to the shooters and hoping those guys hit shots. Maybe Dinwiddie does a couple things here and there. But yeah, I think that establishing what their identity is and now being set on it, I think has pushed them a little bit farther forward than when they had Porzingis, when they were just kind of stuck. Which team of this group is the most dangerous for the top of the West teams? We just did our top of the West roundtable with the Suns, the Warriors, the Grizzlies, and somehow David Locke and the Utah Jazz snuck in there. Which of these teams is the most dangerous? Because we've talked about, Matt has gone in his soliloquy about how both of the LA teams could win the title, right?
I think it's kind of the Nuggets. If Jokic kind of kicks it into gear and he gets this rest a little bit, like
kicks it into gear. That guy, he's like having one of the best seasons.
Hey, it's all relevant. Well, you know what I mean, like from what he's taken off in terms of a regular season play. But I think it's the Nuggets. I'm terrified of Jokic, and that's other than the Clippers. That would be my answer.
I was going to say Denver, just because there's a really good chance that in any series, Jokic is the best player.
Yep.
And when you have the best player, that is a very distinct advantage that nobody else can replicate.
I was talking about this earlier on Locked On Mavs. That is it crazy to think that Luka or Jokic, which one of those guys are the best player in the Western playoffs right now? And which one is it? Right?
I think I think Jokic has more control over the game. I think Luka has more explosive talent in terms of scoring.
The ups and downs are higher, right? Like,
and he looks incredible. But like Jokic shapes the game. Like he just shapes the game. And I think honestly, like his performance versus the Clippers compared to Luka's very
versus the Clippers.
Yeah. Especially in the fourth quarter of those games, right? Like this is, I think, is the problem with how they've gone. And I understand it was a long-term move, and I agree with that on a long-term move. Like I think them moving Porzingis was a good move. But if you've noticed, like his usage has been obscene during the stretch that he's going on, and way more into heliocentrism. Like they started out the season and everybody was like, why are you running ISOs for Tim Hardaway Jr.? Why is Dorian Finney-Smith running like dribble? You have Luka Doncic, and they've slowly gone the other way, and now they're going even further past what Carlisle had in like full Harden Rockets Luka. And that, to me, I have worries about that in various situations. I think the Mavs are a little bit more. I've started just thinking about the playoffs in terms of, do you have different answers for the problems you're going to face? And I think the Mavs' only answer is everybody's pretty good at defense and Luka's amazing. And I think eventually that's probably going to hit a wall.
Yeah, I would say the answer to that is Jokic in terms of the most dangerous player, just because he's the guy that I think, if you're talking about Jokic and Doncic, when both are at the top of their games, who's more difficult to deal with? I think the answer is Jokic, because it's so difficult to match up for that. And you can put him anywhere on the floor and he can do everything that he does everywhere on the floor. And just the multitude of ways that he can just shape a game, that phrase was used before, I think is a little bit higher than Doncic, as opposed to Doncic just gets on these insane rolls.
Yeah.
And he's great. I don't mean to take anything away from Doncic. I know everybody looks for slights in the world of basketball, Twitter, and fandom, but saying that Luka Doncic might not be quite as good as Jokic is not a slight.
We'll see what your Twitter mentions look like tomorrow.
Yeah,
I mean,
I knew how this was going to go.
I can tell you what they'll look like.
I knew how this is going to go, so I'm just going to lean in.
Yeah.
I'll send everyone from Slovenia your way. Are we overlooking LeBron as maybe
That's
being
Serbia
the best?
protecting me? I'll take my chances.
Yeah.
Are we overlooking LeBron as possibly being the best player in this postseason in the West?
No, I think because he could be really burned out by then. And depending on what is being asked of him to carry the Lakers just to get to that point. And, without knowing exactly what's going to happen with Anthony Davis, to some degree, your greatness is defined by who's next to you. And I just feel better about who's next to right now, Jokic or Doncic, compared to right now who's next to LeBron. I'm not discounting LeBron. And if he gets his second wind, like the rest of the West needs to look out because he's always that great. But it's just not feeling right now like it's moving in that direction. But, there's time for this to change.
So
yeah,
like
none of the rest of the
LeBron-
teams have another top 75 all-time player on it.
So like LeBron has given so
Two.
many public statements, you can kind of like track, like you can follow these patterns, right? In 2017, the year after they had the amazing 3-1 comeback, he's in the finals versus AD, and it's just clear that the Cavs have zero shot here. Like there's just, and he goes into a press conference during the finals, and like I'm standing out on court while he's doing the press interview at the stage area, but you can hear that interview through the monitors, and you hear him say like, "I don't know, man. Like they added Kevin Durant. Like, what do you want me to say?" Like you could hear the defeat in his voice. And that was the exact same tone that I heard the other night when they asked about the difference between the Bucks and the Lakers. And LeBron is at a point where he manages a global business and he's an entity and he's got to do stuff like he has to run the Lakers and he's got to manipulate all the other teams into giving them their players and stuff like that. So he's got a lot on his plate. Space Jam. And so
Space Jam,
yeah. And so with all this, I think that
tequila baron.
Tequila Baron.
He's got
I think he gets to the spot where he's just like, this isn't going to work. I'm not going to waste. My time is too valuable.
That's actually, Matt, that's a great way of putting it, because if things are going well, I do think he could get a second win. Like if AD comes back in a reasonable amount of time, and, to be fair to Russell Westbrook, he actually has played better. I would say on balance, as controversial as he's been, the last week or so of games. The last couple games, actually, Russ has been very good. That loss to Golden State, I would say he played the best of the big three. If Russ is still considered part of it, I guess. But like, if the team is moving in the right direction and they are playing well, I promise LeBron will find something in the reserve, manufacture it, whatever. But you're right that if they're limping into this thing, and, they are technically part of the play-in, but you know where this is headed. I don't know how much energy he'll expend towards what is probably an insurmountable goal. And honestly, I don't know how much he should.
There you go. That's the West play-in situation, minus the Blazers, who we left out for very good reason. I think we just didn't include them in this group. But there you go. If you're listening on Locked On NBA, you can subscribe and listen to any of our individual shows. I'll put a link in the description. If you're listening on any of the other feeds, go check out the Locked On NBA show. Every single day we have a show for you covering the NBA with myself, Matt Moore, sometimes Andy, sometimes others. Guys, go check that out. Thanks so much for listening to this Roundtable edition of Locked On NBA.